Hey everyone, today I'm going to do a breakdown of the rules for Napoleon's Triumph, which is a game based on the Battle of Austerlitz. It's a two-player game where you have one player controlling the French army and the other controls the Allied army. It's a block war game, and you win basically by either inflicting sufficient losses on the enemy army or by controlling particular territory at the end of the game. In the game, there are 4 kinds of blocks, and then there are also commanders. The blocks are your units, and the 4 types are either a guard infantry, cavalry, or artillery. Note that the number of symbols on the block, the unit, indicates its strength. And this is a hidden block war game, so keep in mind that you'll be the only person on your side able to see these blocks. Alright, let's take a look at the map. So you'll notice that the map is divided into polygons. These polygon sections are called locales. And each side of the polygon is known as an approach, whereas the middle of the locale is called the reserve. Troops can either be located within the reserve area of the locale or on the approach. It's important to remember that when you have pieces that are blocking an approach, they are not in the same position as those that are in reserve. They're also not in the same position as units blocking a different approach within the locale. The approaches can be considered either narrow, so that means they're as wide as one unit, one block, or the approach is wide, which means that it's as wide as 2 pieces side by side. These approaches have different penalty symbols, and the penalties are directional. So the symbols inside a locale show the penalties for moving and attacking into that locale. So whenever you see a symbol, for example, for the infantry inside the locale, it means that there's going to be a penalty for any infantry that tries to move into that locale. This one here is a cavalry penalty. This is an artillery penalty. This shows that it's obstructed. This shows that this approach is completely impassable, so no one can move into it through this approach. And then inside each of the locales, there's also a number, and that is the locale capacity, and it refers to the total number of units, so that is the total number of blocks that can be located within that locale. It's not the total number of symbols on the blocks, it's the total number of blocks themselves. This locale capacity doesn't apply to units that are moving by road through a locale. On the map, there are also these red lines and brown lines. These red lines are the main roads, while the brown lines are local roads. And roads, as you probably can guess, affect the movement of pieces on the board. If they are on a road, they can be moved further along in a turn, as opposed to when they're just moving from locale to locale. All of the other markings on the map are just for your enjoyment, showing things like elevation, the woods, the marshes. They're just cosmetic and, again, just for you to enjoy. There are 2 different scenarios you can play in the game. There's the 2nd of December scenario and the 1st of December scenario. The 2nd December scenario is probably what you want to start with because the estimated playing time is a bit shorter. All of the Allied pieces will be in play, and this is the historical day of the battle. For your very first game, I recommend going onto BgBBQ and looking up initial setups. When you have no knowledge of how the game is going to play out and what setup is to your advantage or not, go onto BgBBQ and find people who have recommended setups, and I'll post a link for one of these in the YouTube description below. Napoleon's Triumph is played as a series of rounds, and this is kept track of in the time track here, and each round is divided into 2 turns. The Allied player will play first, followed by the French player, and during a player's turn, you can move your pieces and use them to attack enemy pieces. On a player's turn, they will move and or attack with their armies using commands. There are 4 different types of commands in the game. 3 of these are issued using a commander and are known as core commands, while the other one is known as an independent command. So let's cover these 4 different commands. The first core command is called a core move. When you use a core move, you may move any or all units in a core, and the commander moves with them. The opposite of this is another core command called a detach move. This is where you may choose all but one unit and move them while the commander stays in place with at least that one unit. The final core command is an attach command. To issue an attach command, a single detached unit must be in the same position as a commander, and as the name implies, you can then attach the detached unit to your core using this command. Finally, the independent command is also known as a unit move. Unit move commands are used to move any one unit, whether it is part of a corps or already detached. Besides the types of commands available, the only other things you need to know about them are 1. A commander can be chosen to execute only one command per turn. 2. You cannot move a unit using two commands in the same turn. So, for example, a corps command cannot be used to move one unit, followed by an independent command to move that same unit. And 3. It is possible to combine corps moves or unit moves so long as the corps or units begin their move in the same position, are moving to initiate an attack, and attack across the same approach. When units are issued a command, they can move within a locale, to an adjacent locale, or along a road. Movement within a locale refers to movement from reserve to an approach, or vice versa. Movement into a new locale always results in the units finishing their move in reserve, whether movement is into an adjacent locale or along a road. The one exception is road movement involving only cavalry. Cavalry may move by road and end their movement in reserve or blocking an approach. Movement along a road allows movement 2 locales away if it's a brown road, and 3 locales away if movement is along a red road. Any approaches which have this X here are impassable by units or corps, including during retreats. If you've played Sekigahara before, you may recall how units may not use the same road in the same turn. The same is also true in Napoleon's Triumph. However, Napoleon's Triumph differs from Sekigahara in that you may not move units into the same locale on the same turn. This means if one corps or unit moves into a locale, no other units or corps may join them until the following turn in that locale. Alright, finally, movement by road is restricted if you pass beside a locale containing 2 or more enemy units. In this case, the space you enter, which is adjacent to the enemy units, is the space in which you must remain. This is used to simulate the difficulty of moving large quantities of people around large quantities of your enemy. Alright, let's cover the rules that govern attacks in the game. This is where the complexity, as well as the heart of the game, lies. First, initiating an attack really means that you're going to use one of your movement commands to move into a locale containing enemy units. And an important thing to remember when you want to initiate an attack is that as the attacking player, the first thing you do is simply name the approach you want to attack over. You don't name the command or the units you want to attack with. Instead, the play will turn over to the defender. The defender will have to decide now, do they want to retreat from the locale or do they want to stay and defend? Let's actually first talk about retreating because it doesn't end in a battle. So when it comes to retreating, you may or may not actually have the option to retreat. Your ability to retreat depends on the current position of your units in the locale. If you have any pieces defending the approach which is being attacked, you do not actually have the option to retreat. You have to stay and defend. Alternatively, if you have no units defending the attack approach and no units in the reserve, even if you have some other units defending a different approach, you're forced to retreat. You can't stay and defend. Finally, if you have units in reserve, it's your choice to stay and defend or to retreat, as long as the units you're choosing to defend with have not already been used to defend that turn. In the event of a retreat, the only way to do so without losses is if the units are in reserve and are all cavalry. Otherwise, if you retreat, you'll first lose any artillery units in the locale. Then you'll accumulate infantry and cavalry losses based on the width of the attack and/or defense approaches. Let me do an example to explain. Here, let's say I'm being attacked across this approach, which we'll note is wide. I have units in reserve that have already defended, and I have units on this approach. First, my artillery units are destroyed. Next, my cavalry in reserve retreat without losses. Then, the infantry in reserve are going to take losses based on the width of the attack approach, which in this case is wide. So 2 losses will have to be taken. I can choose which infantry unit or units are going to take these losses. For the units located in the defense approach, which was not the approach being attacked, they're going to take a 1-point loss because the approach here is narrow instead of wide. Again, I can choose which of the units are going to take the strength point lost. Once the losses have been applied, the retreating units must move into an adjacent locale. However, the locale into which they retreat may not contain enemy units and may not take them through an impassable approach. If there is no legal way to retreat, all units are destroyed. In the retreat locale, units are placed in the reserve position, and any units within a corps must be detached from their commander except for one. Finally, don't forget that all locales have a capacity limit. If you move into a locale which has a capacity limit lower than the number of units you just retreated, you must eliminate additional units until you no longer exceed the locale capacity. Okay, let's switch back to the case where you either cannot retreat or decide you're going to stay and defend. In this case, the defending player must select which of their units will be defending units. And at this point, they don't turn the units face up, they're just going to indicate what units will be considered part of the defending army. Play instead returns to the attacking player, who then will decide whether they want to proceed with an attack or whether they will feint. Because a feint results in the end of the attack, let's cover that one again first. So first, it's useful to know that if you are attacking with cavalry by road, their attack must end in a feint. The cavalry units can end their road movement in reserve or blocking the approach. For all other attacks, if the attacking player is choosing to feint and the attack was made using units already positioned in the approach, the units will remain in the approach. So kind of what starts in the approach stays in the approach. But if the attack was made using units in the reserve, they can choose whether they would like to move up to the approach or whether you want to keep the units positioned in the reserve. So at this point you might wonder why feint at all? I mean, if you want to move your units to block the approach, why not just issue a movement command and do so? One of the reasons is because of how a feint affects the defending player. If the defending player's units are in reserve, that is, they aren't already blocking the approach, you force them to commit at least one unit to block the approach over which you just feinted. This can either force the movement of their entire corps to the approach, or force them to detach a unit or units and send them to defend the approach, which weakens their army in reserve. So there is some strategy to be had when it comes to feinting. But okay, let's say you decide not to feint, which again, you have to feint if you're attacking using cavalry by road. Otherwise, once the attacking player declares their attack won't be a feint, play will turn back to the defender, who must now choose from among their defending units either 0, 1, or 2 units, which will become what is called their defense-leading units. The number of units they can choose depends on the width of the approach. They can choose 0 or 1 if the approach is narrow, and 0, 1, or 2 units if the approach is wide. These units can be of any type if they're already defending the approach. On the other hand, if they're defending from the reserve, they must be of the same type and from the same corps. From reserve, you may also not choose a 1-strength unit to be a leading unit. At this point, the defender will also turn the units face up, which allows the attacker to see what the damage is that they're in for. Play then goes to the attacker, who now will name the attack command they are spending in order to move and engage in the attack. This will define their attacking units. From the attacking units, the attacking player will now also choose 0, 1, or 2 units based on the width of the attack approach. Then, just like the defender, if the approach is narrow, they can choose 0 or 1 units to reveal. And actually, if the approach is wide, the attacker has the option to still declare it as a narrow attack and choose to reveal 0 or 1 units. If they choose to do 0 or 1 units and declare it narrow, the defender will then choose which of their 2 units to turn face down again. When choosing units for the attack, any infantry or cavalry units, which are only a 1-strength unit, may not be named. The attacker must also remember that units can't be paired unless they're of the same type. This includes guard infantry units, which may only be paired with other guard infantry and not regular infantry units. Note that attacks with guard infantry and artillery attacks also have their own special rules, so let's ignore any attacks that involve either of those for now. So we're just going to talk first about non-artillery attacks. Once the attacker names their units, an initial result is calculated in 2 steps. Step 1. Subtract the strength of the defending units from the strength of the attacking units. Step 2. Potentially modifying the value by subtracting 1 if the defender is blocking the approach and the attacking units are infantry, and subtracting 1 again if a terrain penalty applies. This will yield an initial result, and after it's calculated, it may be possible for the defender to counterattack. Assuming the attack was not led by artillery, the defender may counterattack if they were behind after this initial result was calculated. If they were ahead, counterattacks can only be made using cavalry. Regardless of the initial result, artillery units cannot be used to counterattack. Supposing a counterattack is made, the defending player may choose either 1 or 2 units from the defending army, regardless of whether the attack is wide or narrow. If 2 are chosen, they must be of the same type and from the same corps. Each unit chosen suffers a 1-point strength loss, and then the initial result is modified by the reduced strength of the counterattack to yield the final result. If there is no counterattack, the initial result becomes the final result. The final result is used to determine who won the battle. When the final result is greater than 0, the attacker wins and moves all their units into the locale, while the defender must take losses and retreat. Any losses from the retreat are on top of the losses incurred from the battle, which I'll explain what those losses are in a moment. Alternatively, if the final result is below 0, the defending army wins. In this case, the attacking army must end its turn in reserve and detach all units from their corps commander except 1. In the event of a tie, you will compare the number of units involved in the attack with the number of units that were used to defend, which will include any used to counterattack, and then it's the army with the greater number of units which will win the battle. If there's still a tie, the French win by default. Okay, let's talk about battle losses. So after a battle, both sides may take losses. It's based on the number of leading units used by each player. For example, if 2 leading units were named by the defender and 2 by the attacker, both the attacker and defender must lose 2 strength points. Any units used to counterattack are not leading units, and therefore they don't contribute to the losses suffered by the attacker. Then, depending on whether the attacker or defender won, the losing party will take additional losses equal to the amount the final result was above or below 0, respectively. I anticipate many of you, like me, are going to have a hard time keeping this straight, so I highly recommend keeping a graphic flowchart handy for keeping track of the math for all these different scenarios. And there's some good ones on BgG, and I'll put a link in the video description for one we like to use, which you can check out after. That basically ends a non-artillery attack. I previously mentioned that there's some special rules for attacking with artillery, so let's do those next. First, artillery units cannot lead an attack from reserve. This means in order to utilize your artillery, you must have already positioned your artillery units to block the approach in a previous turn. And you'll recall that units can only be moved using a command once per turn. So though this can make it somewhat difficult to line up an attack using artillery, the difficulty is more than made up for it if you do have the chance to execute an attack with them. This is because when you attack with artillery, the strength of the defending units is ignored, and the defender is denied any chance of counter-attacking, so it's kind of a free attack. Artillery-led attacks are also the only kind of attacks which allow you to make a follow-up attack over the same approach on the same turn. So after an artillery attack is resolved, the attacking player may spend another one of their available commands, which effectively means a back-to-back attack on the locale. So that's very powerful. In fact, it's powerful enough that you need to wait 1 turn in between an artillery-led attack unless you've located your artillery on a hill. To attack using artillery, you may only use a detach move command or a unit move command. So you cannot use a corps move command to issue an attack with artillery. And this means your artillery will always end up as detached units after they perform an attack if they aren't already detached to begin with. The detach move command lets you attack using artillery, which is part of a corps, while a unit move command lets you attack using artillery, which is already detached from a corps. Remember that you can combine 2 or more unit moves together if they will be used for the same attack. So if your artillery is already detached, this is how you can attack with more than 1 artillery piece. This means your artillery will always finish an attack detached from a corps. In addition, unlike attacks with infantry or cavalry, attacks with artillery finish with all pieces in the same place that they started. the defender does not retreat, and artillery pieces do not move into the locale which they attacked. Similar to artillery, I mentioned that there are some special rules when you attack with your guard infantry units. That's these ones here. If you plan to attack using your guard infantry as leading units, you have the option of specifically declaring it a guard attack. In this case, you'll name it a guard attack at the same time that you name the attack approach, and you'll need to reveal that at least one of the attacking units is in fact a guard infantry unit. In order to do a guard attack, the approach cannot be obstructed, and you will forfeit your option to feint. The advantage of naming a guard attack in advance is that any of the defense-leading units of 1 or 2 strength will be automatically reduced in strength by 1. The rest of the battle is resolved just like any other attack. So let's say you've been through a couple battles now, and you are hoping to get some reinforcements on the board. The timing and ability of bringing on reinforcements in the game depends on which of the 2 scenarios you are going to play. If you play the shorter December 2nd scenario, which is what I recommend for your first game, then all of the allied pieces start the game in play, so the allied player doesn't have any reinforcements available to bring on. So make do with what you got. The French, on the other hand, will have all pieces in play except Bernadotte's and Devout's corps. These may enter play when the time track marker reaches the respective commanders' names. In the shorter scenario, this means Bernadotte can enter any time because we've already passed his name on the time track, while at least one turn has to pass before Devout can enter play. Reinforcements come on at these entry locales here and must use road movement to enter play. They require commands to enter play. They can be detached prior to entry and enter by a unit move command, or they can enter as a corps by corps move commands. But pieces that enter as a corps must come on together at the same entry locale by the same road. You're also allowed as the French to give 2 move commands on the turn of entry. So for example, you could bring on Devout by a corps move command, and then Devout's corpse could be moved again by a second corps move command. The final element of the game is morale. As I mentioned at the start, one of the ways to win Napoleon's triumph is to reduce your opponent's morale to 0. Note that your artillery can't be used to reduce an army's morale to 0 if your opponent's morale is currently sitting at 1. Morale is otherwise lowered 1 space for each unit lost in battle or lost by retreating. Your morale is also lowered when certain units are committed for the first time. In other words, when they're used to lead a defense or an attack, used to counterattack, or take losses, or retreat. For example, if you commit your heavy cavalry, this results in a 2-point morale loss, in addition to any normal morale reduction for losses. Similarly, committing your guard infantry units for the first time results in a 4-point morale loss, in addition to any normal morale reduction for losses. And in fact, if you lose after attacking with your guard infantry, you'll also suffer another 3-point morale loss. So be sure to win. The morale track begins at 23 for the French and 27 points for the Allied army. If the French decide to bring reinforcements into the game, they will gain 4 morale points at this point. However, this also triggers a change in the territorial win conditions for the game and will make it much more difficult for the French to achieve victory. Alright, finally we come to the last few rules, which are all about how to win. I mentioned already that a player wins if they can reduce their opponent's morale to 0 before the time track reaches the end. In effect, this is a crushing victory. But if neither side is successful in doing that, and the time track reaches the end, a winner is determined based on the control of certain objective locales. That's what these blue, red, black, or green stars indicate. Now, to control a locale, it has to contain a commander with at least 1 infantry or artillery unit, and you have to be able to trace a path from that locale back to a main road reinforcement point for that side without crossing through enemy-occupied territory. So, okay, example. So, this territory here might be able to trace a line back to the Allies' reinforcement point via these roads, but none of them would be able to pass through a locale containing enemy units. In effect, you won't be able to control a territory if you are surrounded by the enemy or if your commander is only accompanied by cavalry, since like I mentioned, it has to be a commander with infantry, at least 1 infantry or artillery unit. So, of the territories available, which ones do you have to control or prevent control of to win? Well, if the French have not brought on any reinforcements, which is to their advantage, then the Allied player wins by controlling at least one blue star objective, provided the French don't control any green, black, or red objectives. If the Allies fail to gain a blue star, or the French control one of the other colored objectives, then the French win. If, on the other hand, the French have brought on reinforcements, the French will win if the Allied player does not control any blue star objectives, and the French control at least one green, one black, and one red objective. So that's one of every color. You can see then how much harder it is for the French to win this way. If the Allied player controls a blue star objective, the French lose, but the French also lose if they don't control one of every other color objective themselves. Wow, okay, those are all the rules you need to know to play Napoleon's Triumph. And I hope this has been a good way to learn alongside or instead of the rulebook perhaps. And I anticipate I will try and do a follow-up video with some attack examples for you guys, though there's definitely a couple of those already out there. But till then, it's up to you to grab a gaming partner, get the game out, and try it out. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on the video, especially if you've made it now all the way to the end, and we'll see you next time.